As countries in the OSCE where gender equality is...
I'd compliment Deputy Cleary for his thoughtful contribution. We are an island. We trade or we die, and we don't just trade in goods and services, but we trade also politically and culturally and academically in a myriad of ways. And there is an idea alive at the moment that in certain quarters that we can resolve our great problems on our own, and we cannot, and nor can others. And there are those who would have us not only burn bondholders and investors, but also burn relationships and credibility and confidence in Ireland's commitment to the wider world. But we do have a reputation to rebuild. And that means re-engaging with those countries and those organisations and those issues that we did ignore in the past during the boom years. And it means fulfilling our responsibilities beyond our shores. I'm very glad that the Taoiseach and the Whip's office have facilitated the time for this debate so that Dail may discuss the important work of the OSCE. I was privileged myself to be asked by the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach to head the Oireachtas delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE. While the Minister has given the House a clear picture of the work of that organisation, as have other deputies with their contributions, this is our Parliament, and I will speak on the important work being done in the organisation's Parliamentary Assembly. Initially, though, I would like to commend the Taoiseach and all of the diplomatic staff working here in Dublin in the task force, headed by Ambassador Frank Cogan, and in Vienna, headed by Ambassador Owen O'Leary. They and their staff are a compliment to the Taoiseach and the way he has assumed and directed his chairmanship of the OSCE. And if I might comment myself briefly on the recent event in the Royal Hospital in Kilmainham, I was very proud, as a member of this Dáil and as an Irish person, to receive the compliments that I did receive on behalf of the government there for the good work that the Taoiseach and his diplomatic corps have done in the role of chairmanship of the organisation. I mean, the conference itself on the Northern Ireland peace process shared future was trying to use our own history as a case study, perhaps, for other situations throughout the world. And for those who attended, both from Ireland and the dignitaries and diplomats who came from abroad, I think they got a lot from it. I certainly did. But it does stand as a fine example of the excellent work being done by our government in the sphere. And it's important to recognise that this has been done with a reduced budget and with reduced resources. As for the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE, and the parliamentary dimension of the organisation's work, which I have experienced myself now on a number of occasions since being elected to this Dáil, we deal with the same issues as the OSCE, but as parliamentarians, not as governments. And the primary task of the Assembly is to facilitate interparliamentary dialogue in an effort to meet the challenges of democracy throughout the OSCE area. We are 360 parliamentarians from 56 countries, and we discuss matters that matter to each one of us. And I think that's a powerful thing. It's a powerful thing, certainly, as I've experienced it, to be involved in. And we have 6 members of the delegation: Deputy Heather Humphreys, Anne Phelan and Arthur Spring, Stephen Donnelly and Senator Jim Walsh. And while we have political allegiances here at home, we leave these behind when we go to work in the Assembly. We work as a unit and we represent our country, and I believe we represent it well. Because one of our driving motivations is to represent our country as best we can and to make a meaningful and a real contribution to the Assembly's work. And I believe that we are fortunate in that so many parliamentarians from our partner countries approach it in the same way. In the course of the meetings we have attended, we have discussed a number of things, from our own Criminal Assets Bureau to cybersecurity and cybercrime, human trafficking, detention of political prisoners, for example, in Ukraine, election monitoring in a number of countries, including Tunisia and Russia, and conflict resolution in areas like Nagorno-Karabakh. As it is the largest regional security organisation in the world, the brief is wide-ranging. But I will touch on just a few of the issues that we have dealt with in the Parliamentary Assembly to date. Human trafficking is one, and Deputy Anne Phelan touched upon this briefly. In February, Ms. Maria Grazia visited Dublin and met with our delegation here. She is the OSCE Special Representative and Coordinator for Combating Trafficking in Human Beings. And we discussed at length in our own meeting the issue of human trafficking and how it relates to forced labour. And since then, and following on from that meeting, we have engaged with Ms. Grazia again, with fellow Assembly members, in particular from the United States, and other interested partners, in the hopes of ourselves organising a side event or meeting at one of the future Assembly meetings abroad. And our hope is to do that to help try and bring this issue more to the fore in the work of both the Assembly and the OSCE, and to help educate other parliamentarians as to the types of laws and measures that can be brought in their own countries to help with this matter. Of course, it's something that affects us as well. So that's the benefit of this multilateral organisation in working together on such an important issue. In relation to Syria, recently, as the conflict in Syria escalated to yet another level of violence, and having discussed the issue of Syria at the Parliamentary Assembly in Vienna, Deputies Arthur Spring, Anne Phelan and myself raised the crisis as a topical issue. I think this is a good example of how the work of the Assembly reflects back on individual parliaments and individual parliamentarians. I'm not sure we would have taken the interest that we do take in this conflict now if it had not been for the discussions we had participated in previously. And that's a very big positive, I believe, because the more parliamentarians that raise this issue, the more governments that must pay attention, and one hopes the more pressure that will be brought to bear on the government in Syria. And I think it's important to mention that, particularly today in light of the most recent events there and the terrible things that are happening. As for election monitoring, which is another very important work of the Assembly and the OSCE, much of the work of the OSCE is conducted through the organization's Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, which deals in the main with election monitoring and is headed most capably by Ambassador Lenarchik in his offices from Warsaw. There are long and short-term observers, sponsored by governments, including our own, and they're deployed to countries throughout the organization to monitor their elections and to ensure that they are free and fair. There's no discrimination here, and this year election monitors will be deployed in Russia and in America to monitor the presidential elections there. An essential component, I believe, of those missions is the delegation from the OSCE's Parliamentary Assembly. As parliamentarians, people who have been through the election process ourselves, we add an extra dimension of scrutiny to proceedings, a perhaps more relevant experience insofar as assessing the conduct of elections. Of course, our work cannot be done without the long and short-term observers, but the experience we bring on the day, on the ground, in the middle of the seeming chaos that is the democratic election process, is critical. And I'll speak, if I may, for a moment on my own experience in Russia, because I was fortunate to witness this firsthand in terms of the election monitoring in March, when the Assembly decided to send an observation mission to the Russian presidential elections. There is much happening in Russia on the political front at the moment, and it was the good work of the OSCE, as the only independent external observers of their parliamentary elections to the Duma last December, who were able to legitimately determine the conduct of those elections. So we traveled to the presidential elections to continue that good work. As a member of the organization of the OSCE, it is important that we continue in our commitments to our fellow parliamentarians there and the people that they represent. Now, as a new TD and a young TD, it was a fascinating experience, in fact. And I believe every elected member of this House should at one stage or another participate in an observation mission abroad. You learn in a very short period of time the true value of democracy, of strong political and democratic institutions, of the power of giving the franchise, giving the vote and the voice to those who may not have exercised it before, or who may not be able to exercise it as freely as we do here. And I think our own Parliament will be stronger if we each took time to observe the election processes in our OSCE partner countries. I spent 6 days in Moscow myself, and we met with election observers that the OSCE had deployed on the ground already. We visited the Duma. We met with representatives of the different political parties there, of the different candidates. We met with one of the candidates, Mr. Prokhorov, who came third in that election. We were briefed by civic society, including Golovs, and saw their operations, and we met with the state-run and with other independent media. On the day, I opened and closed a polling station in the Moscow North Central area, which was fascinating, actually. I visited many others throughout the day, including a polling station in a prison. And to see that, and to see how one administers an election on such a wide scale across 9 time zones and a number of regions was quite something to observe. I witnessed the count, I did my tallies, I reported back to my team in the early hours of the morning, and then later that morning there was a debriefing with all the monitoring teams, taking in reports from all over the country. We held a press conference, and then for the time being at least our work was done. But I would like to state what the head of our delegation, Danilo Pekula from Croatia, concluded on that occasion. He said, there were serious problems from the very start of this election. The point of the elections is that the outcome should be uncertain. This was not the case in Russia. There's no real competition, and abuse of government resources ensure that the ultimate winner of the election was never in doubt. Thank you. This was the truth of the matter, and Mr. Pekula stated it as it needed to be stated, in stronger terms than others, and following our direct experience there. This is the added value of the Parliamentary Assembly in a very meaningful and demonstrable way, and I highlight this statement making no criticism of the essential work done by the OSCE observers or the participating governments of the OSCE in election monitoring. My point is only to emphasize the important extra dimension that we as parliamentarians, answerable only to the people who elect us, can bring to such situations. And just to conclude, our work as parliamentarians is important. This body, the OSCE, is essential. If it did not exist, it would have to be created. I would like to commend the new Secretary General, Ambassador Zanier, on all of his good work to date. Insofar as the Irish delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly is concerned, I would like to thank the IPU here for their excellent support, as well as the Secretariat of the Assembly in Copenhagen, led ably by Secretary General Spencer Oliver with his staff. Our Assembly President, a Greek parliamentarian and friend, is Petros of Timiou, and I'd like to personally congratulate him on serving the Assembly so well these past 2 years. My thanks also to the diplomats who have assisted us so well abroad, and finally to my fellow members of the delegation for all their hard work to date. Ireland has a reputation to rebuild abroad. Our work in the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly is very much a part of that, as is the fine work that the Taoiseach is doing in chairing the OSCE this year. It's not all selfish. We believe we are making a difference, and we are making a significant contribution to international events.
Thank you, Deputy. Now call Deputy Pat Breen.
Thanks very